So, Themis, I will give you the control now.
Thank you, Antonio.
Just 1 second. Now, there you have it.
Okay, yeah, perfect. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the second webinar of the COVIDX project. My name is Themis Anagnostopoulos, and I am a software engineer for Intrasoft. Today's webinar will be mostly technical, presenting the COVIDX Sandbox and all the services that it offers. We will try to keep the presentation as short as possible in order to have more time for the questions that will follow. I will kindly ask from all the participants to keep your microphone muted during the presentation. Thank you. So I will start with a brief introduction to what the Sandbox is and the description of the data management and harmonization services that it offers. Then I will pass the floor to my colleagues in order to present the data anonymization process, then the Sandbox security services, and finally the integration layer of third parties, SMEs, and clinical data providers. So what Sandbox actually is, well, it is a multi-layer technological framework. It consists of a set of microservices that work collectively in order to, first of all, enable seamless access to healthcare information from various heterogeneous data sources. Then to offer some data or metadata management, harmonization, storage, querying, and retrieval services. It also creates a technological framework that will allow the integration of all the analytics / predictive modeling / AI-based decision support tools, which will come from third parties and will give access to the collected data. The integration process will follow the continuous integration, continuous deployment best practices, and the Sandbox will offer some of the most popular DevOps tools for this purpose. Sandbox also emphasizes on data security by adopting all the security principles that will ensure data protection as well as compliance to GDPR and national regulations. Finally, it utilizes virtualization technologies such as cloud computing, containerized applications, etc., in order to permit fast orchestration of the services, high availability, data resilience, flexibility, and scalability. So this is an overview of the architectural diagram of the Sandbox. As you can see, it is a completely modular architecture. All the inner boxes inside the architecture represent different microservices that work together in order to provide a complete technological solution. I will not go deeper right now into each module in order not to waste too much time on the technical details of each one. In any case, you can read the detailed description of the architecture and all the technologies that will be used on the documents that complement the open call, and we can, of course, answer any questions regarding the architecture. And now, regarding the data management services, Sandbox is capitalizing on popular, mostly open source and well-established technologies, such as MongoDB and the ELK stack, in order to provide these services. Firstly, we have the data collection services, which are responsible for extracting and collecting the data from multiple heterogeneous sources. Then this collected data or metadata go through the data harmonization services, where they are curated and enriched according to a common data model. This data model will try to follow some of the most popular standards in the healthcare data industry, such as HL7 version 2 and 3, HL7 Fire, ICD 10 and 11, etc. It also offers storage services where after the data and metadata have been curated, they will be stored in a centralized repository. This repository acts as a cataloging and search engine that allows complex and fast queries to third-party applications or users. Finally, the visualization services will create customizable and interactive dashboards that will provide graphical representation of the stored information. So this is all from my side. Thank you for your attention. And we can now pass the floor to the colleagues from CERMAS, who will present the data anonymization process.
Yes, Amino. Hi, all. Thank you very much for your attention. We are talking about the anonymization process and the privacy in COPEX. Let me see. Yeah. In a project as relevant as COVID-X, in which we want to have a high level of quality, we must also have a very high level of regulatory compliance. As you know, we are not trading basic data. Our data is classified as special categories of data by the GDPR. So the project must be designed around the data protection from the beginning. What is important? The project and all its partners are subject to a very strict regulation that includes very important financial penalties, not for public entities, but yes, for private entities. The pseudonymized data remains personal data. This concept has to be clear. The treatment of patient personal data for purposes different that healthcare requires, in many cases, the express consent of the patient, proportionality, and other special conditions and guarantees that cannot be ensured in all studies. Working with pseudonymized data is very insecure, because we will never have enough control of the possible problems that may appear. The protection and audit measure of information system with personal data are very complex and demanding. Pseudonymization is not a sufficient guarantee in massive data processing project. And the control, for this reason, the control authorities identify this type of project as a project with special risks. Therefore, a medium security measures are not acceptable. So the most appropriate approach is therefore to work with anonymization data, because these data are not personal data yet. That is no longer subject to the strict regulation of the GDPR. Although its protection remains strategic for the project, of course. About the anonymization process. As a byproduct of deliverable DEL 1.1, ICAI has been developed to help consortium members and third parties from the open calls to anonymize the data of his dataset. The guide is a mandatory reference framework that shows techniques and examples to carry out the process. The person responsible for the quality of the animation process will be each partner responsible for the data under their own responsibility. Obviously, the consortium does not have the possibility to check if the data is well anonymized or not. So its partner will sign a responsible declaration that the data provided has been anonymized according to the specification of this guy and is therefore no longer considered personal data. The COBIC-X consortium and third parties can never receive access personal data because they will become responsible for those data. And this is not acceptable. A lot of problems as a consequence of this can be occurred. This is the steps. Okay, in the first step, a pseudo anonymization process is carried out which already eliminates the personal data that can be used for direct identification of the patient and also does not load the non-clinical relevant data, but could be served to identify a patient. So we produce a pseudo anonymized repository with personal data still. The responsible is the health center or clinical partner. In the second step, the pseudonymized data are subjected to a series of processes that prevent their re-identification, after which they cease to be personal data. At the time they can be part of the federal Sandbox and be used for study without risks to patient privacy. This is the content of the anonymization guide. We can find instruction for the organization of a team for the anonymization process, which are the participants and the different roles. We have information about the training that they should now for a correct anonymization. I'm talking about the anonymization team. In this guide, you can find examples of privacy impact analysis focus on risks as the GDPR demand. Organizational measures that you can do in order to make additional guarantees. Different techniques for anonymization and one use case from Spanish pilot. And a last chapter with additional guarantees that is necessary taken into account. So finally, the conclusion is very important to keep in mind different messages. COBIC-X consortium cannot accept data that is not anonymized because, among other things, it will become responsible for it. It should be based on a PAI as the starting point. Anonymization is not a generic or general process. It must be adapted to each study. Additional guarantees must be established, and very important, finally, the process must be auditable by the authorities. This is enough from my part, from my side.
Thank you, Jose. Hello, everyone. I'm Alexandros Karadjos from 8bells, and I will present you the security services of COVID-X Sandbox. Let's begin. As it was already stated, data anonymization is a way to protect personal data from being identified. Nevertheless, there is always a small risk of re-identification. So we need to take additional steps in order to ensure the protection and the privacy of the data. These, the three main pillars that we'll take under consideration are the data anonymization, the security of the sandbox, and the risk analysis. Since we already mentioned the first one, we'll focus on the latter. To begin with, all the security objectives related to COVID-X Sandbox ecosystem will be addressed, its vulnerabilities and threats, along with their level of impact. Afterwards, we will perform a risk evaluation for each one sensitive objective and address the proper countermeasures that we can take. Let's move on to the security of the COVID-X Sandbox. COVID-X Sandbox tools and services will adopt the three main security principles, which are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The security, of course, it will be applied to the areas below, which are the APIs and connections, the user management, network traffic, the visualization infrastructure, and the source code development. We will construct APIs that follow a safe REST API architecture, and the connections between those APIs will be encrypted using HTTPS protocol. Of course, that means there will be an authentication and authorization process involved, which we'll analyze further. Each user will be authenticated, and that means we will verify their identity by claiming the authentication process. The COVID-X Sandbox will allow access to only a specific and a well-defined number of users. These users, of course, will be technically trained, and in addition, to manage those users, we will implement a role-based access control system. This role-based access control system will enable us to assign roles and permissions to the users. Of course, the users will be assigned with the minimum privileges needed in order to avoid scenarios where a malicious attacker can escalate the rights, for example, and consume excessive amounts of system resources. Moving on to the network traffic, COVID-X Sandbox monitors and analyzes the network traffic with specific network protocols. It maintains an audit trail by logging all the security-related events, as well as provide visualization of these logs displayed on a dashboard. Furthermore, these events are logged and processed by an alert system, which will generate notifications in case of abnormal behavior. As it was already mentioned, COVID-X utilizes orchestration and container technologies, which promote the system isolation, durability, resource management, and robustness. For example, in a case of a node failure, a request made to the cluster can be delivered by another node. Moreover, the COVID-X Sandbox follows a constant integration and a constant development approach. That means that during the development process, there will be constant unit and integration tests, thus ensuring no faulty software comes from the production line. To summarize all the above, when appropriate anonymization technique is used, the price for the edification is high for the attacker. Also, unauthorized users will not be able to access the COVID-X Sandbox. The roles, of course, are clearly defined and entitled to the minimum permissions required. Additionally, all of COVID-X Sandbox will use the latest stable versions in order to avoid older version vulnerabilities. Concerning the activity logging, we will prevent malicious acts as well. All in all the COVID-X Sandbox users will receive proper training for the tools and services as it was already mentioned in order to avoid misuse, and will also have only access to part of the data and not the whole data lake. That is all concerning the security aspects of COVID-X Sandbox services. Thank you everyone for listening.
Hi, thank you, Alessandros. This is Francisco Moreno from the UPM. And I'm gonna talk about the integration and management of the services via APIs. Here is the architecture, the schema of the architecture of the Sandbox box. And the red squares shows where the APIs are gonna be, and where is going to be the input and output for data accessing and data ingestion. So the main objective of this is to ingest access healthcare data from different sources, from medical partners and third parties. So we're going to use an API gateway to include into platforms to manage and expose the APIs on top of the microservice components. So with this, we can centralize all the third parties, data and healthcare data in a single API. And with this, we got like some advantages like authentication, traffic control, and analytics as well. These APIs will be focused in the two main operations that are data integration and data accessing. That will include as well the visualization through Kibana. And also, we will provide a documentation of the APIs with a Swagger that is used for API specification. And we're going to start to talk about the endpoints that we will have for data ingestion. As you see, the endpoint will have an ID for the data provider. It would be a third party or a medical partner. So you can post data through this endpoint, the first one. And there are like three kinds of documents: plain text, two kinds, plain text and PDF, and like a text PDF, and then like a structured data like JSON, CSV, Excel, and so on. And the last one is the images that contain not the image itself, but the URL and the metadata of these images. The next get endpoint is to receive the list of data types from a specific provider. The next one, the third one, you can retrieve the specific data by an INID. And you can also modify this data type. And finally, you can remove. So there is like all the functionalities, like post data to the platform, get to retrieve the data, put to edit the data, and delete the data. Then to retrieve data for a third party, you will have an endpoint that will give you all the data you can access and you have permission to access. And with this, you can retrieve IDs of this data and of course then retrieve this data. The third one, the Kibana third-party dashboard, will give you the endpoints to access to the dashboard of Kibana. And the last one, this card will allow to use the Kibana API for data monitoring. So not just the dashboard, you can also use the Kibana API for retrieving data. And that's it from our side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So now we open the floor for questions. If you do have questions, please raise your hand and you will be promoted to panelists so that you can ask your questions. So we have three. I will, Peter, you are being promoted, and then Alexander. So Peter, please go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, this is Peter. A question I have is regarding anonymization. I understand that for the development phase, it's necessary to use anonymized or pseudonymized data. What about the production environment? Can we expect also to be able to work with full personal data, as this would be required for our solutions we are thinking of?
Tim, can you please answer this? Luis?
Which is the specific question exactly?
Can we expect that we would be able to work with full personal data and healthcare data in a production environment of this?
Using production environment is not a good practice.
No. While developing, we are working on the sandbox, understood, and we're working there with non-anonymized, with anonymized data. But in a production environment, we would be able to work with full personal data.
No personal data in the Sandbox Federate.
Okay, good.
The personal data are anonymized previously.
Okay.
When you are working with data in the Sandbox Federate, all of these data are anonymized, and the partners has to sign a responsible declaration after this. It's very important. It's very important because the regulation are very, for example, the regulation indicates that you must use all the techniques within your reach to ensure that the security measures are adequate. This is a highly interpretable concept. In the event of an incident, the control authority will argue that the measure will not adequate since an incident has occurred.
Okay.
So the better solution without risks, with the maximum control, is work with anonymized data. You can only need give an additional step from pseudo anonymization, and the guarantees are very higher.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Hi.
Maybe we can wait just a little bit. Elena?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'd like to highlight that the production environment is out of the scope of COVID-19. So that will be another step of the development of your technology. And okay, let's first use all the data in the sandbox with the anonymization process, and then if the pilot or proof of concept are okay, then another kind of projects will be developed outside of the scope, as I said earlier on, of COVID-19 project.
So is this question answered? Peter, are you comfortable with the answer? Okay, so let's move. Some other participants asked to ask questions, so I don't remember exactly the order. Probably Luca.
Hey, hi. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question. In the first webinar, it was said that text mining application might not eligible or at least appropriate. However, if I understand correctly from this presentation, there are text data in the sandbox, and I've seen that in some of the hospital also quote about clinical reports. So I would like to know why text mining is not appropriate, and how would the consortium deal with textual information? Thank you very much.
I answered that question. What I said is I didn't know exactly what you meant by text mining. It depends on the scope, because if you are using text mining for health data, it might be okay. But there were some questions asked to the Commission while this call for proposals was being asked, and the questions on text mining were around the literacy. Okay, so if you are dealing with clinical data and text mining inside clinical data, it might be in the scope of our project. If it's text mining to understand other aspects on literacy and so on, it might not be on the scope of our call. Okay, so that's why we don't give an assessment on eligibility before we have all the information, because if you specify a project in a sentence, it's quite different to provide the full application. Okay, so if you think your application is in the scope of the call, please apply and we will evaluate it for sure.
Thank you very much. It's very clear. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have some more people here. Jonas, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the presentation. I think the API became quite clear. So far, I haven't found any information about the actual data that will be available. Like specifically, we are working on a solution for mechanical ventilation, and I would like to know which clinical parameters are made available through the sandbox and where I could find this information.
So,
hello, thank you, Jonas, for the question. Well, a table with all the variables that will be available from the clinical partners that are part of the project has complemented the open call. It is in the documents of the open call. You can see a set of variables supported from its clinical partner.
Okay. Maybe I didn't see that online because I just found a high-level description indicating like that, you know, CT images are available and sort of annotations are available, but not like actual clinical parameters.
so we need to review this. It's just a small update. This is not part of the open call documents. It's side information, okay? But we will make sure that it's properly linked into the high-level description.
Okay, thanks.
Gianluca, I'm going to promote you. And we have someone from VoiceMed.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
So thank you for your presentation. I have two questions regarding the sandbox. The first one is, do we have to use the sandbox environment also within our clinical partner? So also if we apply with a hospital that is not the 3-1 of the list?
Hi. Yeah, the Sandbox is responsible for integrating all the data from all the data providers, the clinical data providers, in a secure way. So all the data will have to go through the Sandbox services.
Okay, thank you. Because with our clinical partner, we were agreeing on a way to get data pseudo with a pseudo identifier, so not with the total anonymization. So within COVID-X is not possible. I understood this pseudo identification.
For that reason, the Sandbox offers several deployment options in the local infrastructure of its clinical partner, so that it can comply to the national regulation that apply to its case. So if you're a clinical partner who would like to contribute with some data, we could deploy an instance of the Sandbox at your premises and use it to ingest data and allow access to third-party services.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem.
If I can add here, if you decide to use the Sandbox, it means that you are compatible to be deployed in all the clinical partners across our ecosystem. So your solution is probably being able to be used more. So if this answers your question, so we have here.
But so we have to use the Sandbox, correct?
Yeah.
We cannot. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So who would like to go next? The people I promoted. Please open your microphone. Juan Pablo and Gianluca. So one of those. Juan Pablo, let's go with you.
Sorry.
Juan Pablo.
Hello. Thank you for your presentations. I was also curious about the data that will be available at the Sandbox, and in particular regarding the imaging data, because in the document you provide, it seems that there will be only chest X-ray or CT scans available, but there are some points here that maybe more data will come. In particular, I'm interested in MRI data of the brain. Do you have any knowledge of this data will be in the Sandbox?
Hi. Well, I guess that this is a question that should be directed to the clinical clinical data providers. I'm not sure for the time being if the clinical partners that are part of the project can support this kind of data, or maybe some third parties, clinical data providers can do so.
So in case we could contact with the clinical partners and to ask them directly if they will provide this type of data.
Please don't contact directly. Ask the questions on the F6S page, and they will answer there, so that everybody is aware of the question and the answer. Okay. Is this good enough for you?
Okay. Thank you.
So before Oscar and Lori, there was Gianluca. Yes, Gianluca, please go ahead.
Good morning. Gianluca Sensidoni, Expert AI. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
And the first question is our proposition will be potentially in order to enhance natural language understanding capabilities inside the sandbox, so expose services with the REST API and insert it in the sandbox together with your end user in Milan, clinical partner in Milan. Second question is, I was late regarding anonymization, but we provide deep semantic technologies, and very often when we analyze anonymize the documents, it depends on the anonymized algorithm. Perhaps you cannot extract a specific semantics or specific correlation because the anonymizer change names, change verbs, insert some synonyms. So the reality is not coherent. The anonymized document is not coherent with the original one. And perhaps you can miss something again regarding semantic output. So if you tell me about few lines about the anonymization algorithm. This is the second question.
There is different techniques for anonymization. In the anonymization guide, you can find a minimum of with samples, with samples and demonstration, a minimum level in order to get enough measures to impossible the re-identify of the subjects. If you have different techniques, we can check it, and maybe it could be valid too.
Because we faced it with different projects in the past, but simply if you in the historical patients records, imagine you have 10 records, and in each records you change the name of the surname. You cannot correlate these 10 records together just to understand the history of the patients. Also, mainly regarding precision medicine, for example.
The techniques for anonymization is necessary that not invalid the data, but in the another side, the anonymization only the name of the surname is not enough. In the anonymization guide, you can find the steps in order to get a sufficient level of anonymization in order to impossibility the re-identify of the subject. Only traditional anonymization like of Fuchs name and surname is not enough in the GDPR. If you only use this technique, you are working with personal data.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you it's necessary you go to the next step. It's not very difficult, and you get a lot of security. In the anonymization guide, you can find the methods to do this.
Okay, and regarding my first question, please. So if my proposition to ingest advanced natural language understanding algorithm semantic based inside the COVIDX sandbox using SOAP RESTful API. Is it current with the target of the call, this proposition?
Hello. Well, yeah, add-on services to the sandbox are more than welcome, and we can evaluate your solution.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have 3 people requesting to speak. Let's go with Laurie Ellison.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the good presentation. I have a question regarding this team player track, that if you come with our healthcare provider, are we required to use the sandbox, or we also could develop the service without the sandbox? The reason for my question is that we provide, or the idea is around automatic speech recognition for a small European languages, like in the Nordics, like Finnish, Estonian, Swedish. And I'm not sure that are those languages available on the sandbox.
Hello. Well, yeah, Sandbox has to be applied in any case, and all the services will be integrated within the Sandbox. Actually, that is one reason that we have Sandbox. It's an integration framework where all the services can be successfully integrated and access the data.
But is it required that we mandatory need to use that because it will be another challenge to apply, for example, Estonian, enable the Estonian language on the sandbox?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the language requirements, but yeah, in any case, the deployment of Sandbox is required.
And can it be then, is the sandbox in a way that we would be able to deploy it on the, let's say, our healthcare provider premises, that we use the sandbox, we adopt all the functionality inside the sandbox, but we would be able to deploy that?
Well, yeah, Sandbox also supports, as I mentioned before, local deployments to the premises of data providers, clinical data providers. So there will be an option to deploy Sandbox in your own infrastructure, or to a premise, a hospital premises.
And you as a program leads, you do not need to have the access to that specific deployment. So it could be a fully closed environment.
Well, yeah, but maybe we might need to have some access to support the installation, some VPN access maybe, or.
But if this would not be available, so it should be fully closed environment. So we take your sandbox, we put our solution inside that, and then run it on our healthcare provider premises. Would that kind of scenario be also applicable?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, Antonio?
Yes, it's available.
It is available. Yeah.
Thanks.
Laurie, are you okay? Do you have any other questions?
No, I'm okay. If we can use the sandbox, or if it's required, but actually we have a very strict requirement. It should be on premise and in closed environment, no external connections available. So therefore,
okay, that's exactly what we are providing with our healthcare provider. So it's on their infrastructure, no outside access, other than for the SMEs that will work with them. But if they are outside, but always in a controlled environment.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Oscar, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. Well, partially my question has been responded with the response to Laurie, because I was also going to ask about the same type of question, but with a small variation on that one. So, because it's mandatory for everybody to use the sandbox in the premises of the healthcare center that we are thinking on. Is it, do we need to use all the services provided by the sandbox, or just a couple of them, or that's my question. And then a second question on that regard, it's it has been said that some data is made available through the sandbox, okay, coming from the different institutions that you have in the project. Is it possible that we can use that data coming from those institutions combined with the data provided by the health care center that it's coming with us in the solution? Is that possible, or we are only obliged to use the data provided in the sandbox, or how that works? Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Temis, do you want to answer?
Yeah, well, I missed the point of the second part of the question, but regarding the first part, the sandbox, as I mentioned before, will be able to be deployed in the. It has first of all to be deployed, and
Yeah. That's clear.
Okay, and what was the second part of
No,
the?
but in that question,
yeah,
if we have to use all the services provided by the sandbox, or just some of them? I don't know, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I mean, you will have the option to select what kind of services you want to use from the. It's not mandatory to use all of them. It depends of its use case.
Okay.
And what is more applicable to you.
Okay.
And then there was the question of the federated deployment. We are not supporting it on this first version, but in the second version, it will be possible to use the federated approach and combine data from multiple data sources and healthcare providers.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And is there a technical document that provides a bit more definition of the different services that what we have in the portal? Or will that be provided afterwards once the proposals will be selected, or something like that?
Yeah, go ahead, James. Go ahead.
Yeah, more services could be integrated after the first open call release from third parties.
But the question was around the full description of the services.
Yeah, exactly. It's more about the full description of the services available now.
They will be available only after you sign the contract, because there are lots of classified information.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, thank you. That's it.
Thank you. So Oscar, Alejandro.
Hello, good morning, and thank you. So it seems that the Sandbox is actually an e-health platform. That's the way I look at it now. It's much more than a sandbox. So the question is this a commercially available e-health platform that is already in the market? Yes or no? And in either case, is this going to be available for production after an eventual project wins, the funds? Is this going to be available for production of that service or product?
Themis, yeah.
Hi. Well, it is not a production tool. It will be developed within the scope of a COVID-X program. It will utilize some mostly open source technologies to provide these services.
Right. So let me explore a little bit more. Perhaps this is interesting for everyone or most of us. We use platforms for communicating devices with with applications back and forth. Okay, probably most of us do that. So jumping into a new platform is good, could be good, could be very positive, and it is necessary for this project. I understand that. But after we develop something on top of it, we want to know if this is going to be available for the future and how. Can you expand on that? Can you tell us a little bit more?
It's I can help you. It's actually one of our main concerns of the project is to make sure that the sandbox is sustainable in the future, and it will be the model. It will be made available is yet to be decided, but it's one of the goals of the consortium that this is money well spent, and that the COVIDX platform, if it has enough traction, is going to be exploited in the future.
Right. Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Laurie, I don't remember if I lowered your hand. Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I have, if I may.
You, of course, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, maybe I missed the first 2 minutes of the presentation, but can you elaborate a bit about the underlying technology of the sandbox? For example, support of the GPU. What's the container technology used there, and how we can is it available for extension and so forth?
Well, yes, Antonio could also help if you could go to the architecture slide maybe, but the sandbox will mostly use will capitalize on the ELK, Elasticsearch, Kibana, Logstash services to provide data management, storage and cataloging. We will also use a database for unstructured data like MongoDB. We will have an API layer that will be used for ingesting data from healthcare providers, and also to make this data available to third parties. So
but just can you elaborate? Will every single microservice be separately packaged into the Docker container, for example?
Well, yeah, this is the this is our scope right now to deploy its microservice within a Docker container, and according to the underlying infrastructure, we will choose the deployment. Preferably, we would like to have a multi-host deployment. But yeah, mainly we'll use Docker.
I think
and you do not plan to have it like OpenShift, for example?
No, we're not going to support OpenShift for.
Okay. And are we able to somehow, let's say, elaborate before we apply that what is the actual technology, how you have packaged this, or this will be available after we have selected?
I think that this model will be available after you have been selected.
Okay, thanks.
I think Sophia wanted to add something here. Sophia from Intersoft.
Yes, Themis, of course, has filled in all the necessary information. I'm only complementing. Yes, information about how the deployment will run and the containerization, etc., will be given to you after selection. This is something we're working now, but we are considering the Docker containers. Local deployment, as we mentioned, also in closed environments. For the deployment, however, we may need access to do the deployment unless you're willing to do it yourself. With respect to data, these are fully anonymized and need to be anonymized, as already earlier explained. And the sandbox is a set of core fundamental services for data integration, data management, analytics, visualization, and security. So you see these as core services that you will be using, either all or some of them, based on your use case and what technology you bring into. to integrate on top your solutions. Okay, so the sandbox needs to be used. It's part of the project in the agreement. And with respect to sustainability and exploitation, as Antonio explained, this is something that we will devise, of course, in the course of the project and together in agreement with any third party that is interested to fully exploit further. Of course, we are a number of partners delivering the sandbox, and it's of interest to all, obviously, to sustain the result of the project.
And thank you for your also if we enhance the sandbox adopting to our actual needs, then how will you be treating this IPR after the end of the project? You know, if we will come up with basically a sandbox which have been adapted to our additional tools that we provide to the solution, for example, ACR for Nordic languages. How you would treat then the IPR of the whole thing after that?
Of course, we need to find an interesting customer. Okay, this is true. But about IPR handling and management, this is something that I suppose we will ask all the parties what IPR comes with, and then we can come up with a joint ownership agreement once, of course, a customer is found that would wish to use the bundle of all the services, okay, in the sandbox.
If I may add here on IPR, so this is a sensitive situation in the project, and there is not a good model or not a good model. There is not a standard way to deal with IPR because the issues will be different from project to project. So what we are requesting is that we reach an agreement until month 6. So the rationale for this is that until month 6, we all know each other. You know what the sandbox is giving you, what the clinical partners are giving you in terms of data. We know what you are adding to the platform, and by then we can reach an agreement on the IPR. We think this is a fair answer to treat the IPR situation once we all know each other and the benefits that we are bringing to the table.
Thank you.
So before asking, we are at 3 minutes past the hour. We can stay a little bit longer, but I would just like to invite everyone to participate in the webinar on the 20th of January. It will be a general an webinar to convey general information. So if you still have doubts about the program, application, evaluation, and so on, please join on the 20th on the 3rd webinar. This one will be made available later today. We just have to wait for the processing times of Zoom, YouTube, and so on. Do you have any other questions for us today? So I think most of the questions that were asked in writing have been answered.
Hello, Antonio. Maybe I have just a last question. It's Arianna from
Yes,
Wiseman.
go ahead.
Just about this sandbox, because at the beginning we thought that was not necessary if we have our partner, but now we understood that actually it is. So we actually are analyzing a voice of patient with COVID-19 in order to detect if they have COVID-19. And so how we were brainstorming with our hospital partner is that we would record the sound of the patient, and then the hospital partner would provide us a list with a pseudo identifier and the PCR result, because we need to have this data PCR benchmark. So if we use the sandbox with anonymization data, how can this work? So do we have to create a data of the sound of the person with the PCR together and then in the sandbox, or I don't know if this question is maybe too specific for our case, or if
the
you could...
data need to be created and inputted. So your tool is doing exactly what? Analyzing the sound?
Yes, so our tool, our machine learning, analyze the sounds of a person, and then in order to detect if this person has COVID or not. But then we also want to know the benchmark result in order to also improve our performance while validating our service. So we would like to know the sound of the person and then also the result of the PCR of the person.
Okay, so but this information is something that the hospital is aggregating and anonymizing, right? This data.
So right now, the hospital is for each person that comes to the drive-in, the hospital tell them to go to record the voice, and then what the hospital provide us before now was pseudo identifier. So they provide us a list of numbers, list of identification numbers with the PCR result, and now we're trying to think in an anonymization way how can we do it.
So this data, after you anonymize them, will be ingested, as you see here in the figure, into the sandbox. And then you will be given the API to filter this information so that are ingested then into your analytics processing algorithm. And you can be given an API then to visualize the results if you wish.
Okay. So basically, the information will be put into the sandbox in a package, like voice and PCR result together in a package,
Yes,
so
but
that
they
we
need
can
to be anonymized. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
okay,
then you can access them from there through an API whenever you wish. Perhaps they are inputted into the sandbox in batches, and you schedule when to run your processing tasks. And then, of course, the outputs can be visualized, or I don't know where you want to serve the outputs of your results.
Okay, thank you, Sophia. That was really helpful.
In addition to this, when you are working with the sandbox and identify specific variables that produce probably pathology, for example, you can go, if you want to re-identify the subject, you can go to the original data in raw with these variables in order to identify the people that you need to talking with them in order to prevent the pathology that you has find using the sandbox.
Okay.
So the identification is possible, but with a different team. Different, you can go to the original repository with the data in raw with these variables that you have find in the sandbox that produce a specific result, medical result, in order to prevent the problems to these subjects. But you always work with anonymized data in the sandbox.
Yes, yes, exactly. There would be a unique identifier to original data if possible to retrieve. The sandbox ideally will have, if there are the raw data are quite big, like images or even sounds, they will remain on the original repository of the clinical partner. The sandbox will catalog mainly the metadata information, like describing the data, and these will be able, and according to these, then the retrieval will be done with links to the original data. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sofia and Jose.
Sorry, we have another question from Laurie. Please go ahead.
Very, very short one. I just wanted to clarify the question that if we have a local deployment with our healthcare provider, and if they will provide the actual non-anonymized data, like audio recordings of the phone calls, can this be also in principle used within the sandbox?
What we have been told by in consortium clinical partners is that the software or wherever the data are to be processed needs to be certified, legally certified. And if this is not the case, or if these restrictions apply within your clinical partner or the country that your clinical partner resides, then it may not be possible to do that.
But if they have the right to use, and we will work with in their premises within closed environments, and if they provide because with the phone calls, the issue is that if customers or patients are saying their names before you apply the transcription, you don't know who is telling what. Yeah. And therefore you only can anonymize it if you have processed that, not upfront. You cannot do it upfront.
So that's, sorry, Sophia, that's something that should be clear on your application, how you address privacy in this context.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, because with this information, we may give you an incorrect answer, which actually does not apply to the situation, and you are perfectly electable or not, and we will be misleading you. Okay.
We will be describing that. Thank you.
Thank you. So do you have any other questions for today? Okay, so again, all you are invited for the third webinar on January 20th, 12 p.m. Thank you for attending. Thanks for all the members of the project that helped putting up this presentation and answering all the questions. Thank you all. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye. Thank you.